Today I'm going to be going through the differences between Softube's Console 1, MKII, and then of course the current version, the MKIII, right there. If you're an existing user of Console 1 and you're considering whether the upgrade to the MKIII is worth it today or not, I'm going to be going over that and really explaining the differences and giving you my opinion. Now, if you're a current Console 1 user and you're contemplating upgrading to the MKIII version of it, well, that's what this video is going to be all about. The majority of functionality is the same between all three units, but there are some differences and some enhancements in the MKIII as you would expect. If you've never used Softube's Console 1, I'll tell you, I think you're missing out. I think it's one of the best control surfaces for plugins available today. In my opinion, as of the date of this video, Softube's Console 1 is without a doubt the best plugin control surface available today. Now, you'll find other competitors that are similarly laid out, quite honestly, and laid out well and work very, very good. One being SSL's version of the control surface that controls their channel strip. However, you have limitations with that because it only controls a couple of their plugins as of today. I do believe they plan to incorporate other plugins at a later date, but as of today, that's not available. Whereas in the Console 1, you can use a variety of Softube plugins as well as plugins from other manufacturers like Universal Audio. There are two ways on the Console 1 that you can load basically a channel strip. You can load one that fills in all of the various sections on it with a plugin that's similar, aka a particular channel strip. You can also independently choose for each section of Console 1 a particular plugin that you may want to be on the gate as an example, or one on the EQ, and then have something like an 1176 or an LA2A or a CL1B, something like that on the compressor. And you can do those independently the same way that you can with the channel strips. Now, if you're not familiar with how everything works within Console 1, on the various versions, Mach 1, Mach 2, or Mach 3, I did a video recently on Softube's Console 1 Mach 2. And in that video, I go through and demonstrate all of the various features and show how they work. So if you're not used to or don't really know much about Console 1, I encourage you to go check out that video and then come back to this one to help you decide which purchase is the best one for you. As a reminder, one of the ways I make money on this particular channel is with direct links for anything you may want to purchase out there from Sweetwater. Sweetwater does not pay me to say that, but however, they will give me a very small percentage of every sale in which you use those links. The first link down below will actually take you to Sweetwater, where you can just buy anything you want to buy, anywhere from picks to that fantastic channel strip you've been wanting to buy for $3,000 or $4,000. I will get a small percentage of that after it's paid for. And so that really helps this channel out. Now, I also have a list of gear down below that are specific pieces of gear that I recommend. So if you want to check that list out, you can click that and then go and purchase that particular item if you'd like to add it to your studio. These are things that really help me kind of make a little bit of money, because believe it or not, you don't make that much money off views. So most of us YouTubers need to support that some other way. I will disclose that Softube did send me the MKIII for free for me to check out. So keep that in mind as you're evaluating this product. I can assure you that I never give a biased opinion. My opinions are always going to be my own, and I turn down way more product reviews than I get, because simply if it's a product I'm not likely to give a good review on, or one where I feel like I'm going to give an incredibly bad one on it, I don't really want to get into that territory. But I will give you an honest review. I always have and I always will, and this one is no exception. Now I'm going to start talking about the differences between these two. Up here, I've got the Mach 2 version, and down here, I've got the Mach 3. And so I'm going to be kind of pointing out some of the differences and ultimately go into a little bit of detail on what those differences are and why they mean so much. So I'm going to talk about the similarities first, okay? Over here, you have an input gain on both of them. You also have high and low cut filters. Then you have a gate section here, EQ section here, compressor section here, Then you've got something unique to the Console 1, and that's in their drive that really adds, well, a lot of character to it. And of course, your pan knob there and there, and your volume output. Now, you also have 1 through 20, so these bank in banks of 20. So the first 20 channels will be on that, and then if I bank one more to the left, you'll see down here where it says, you'll see down here where now I'm at 41 through 60, 61 through 80, and then I keep going back down here until I get to 1 through 20. Any tracks that are active will show you that here. You also get some LED meters that you do not have up here to where they're graphic, to where they're 3. The same lights will light up on the particular channels as you go through them up here, but that's how you go about that. Now, what are some of the differences in these particular controls? Okay, so let's break that down. One of the features that they've added to the control surface side of this is have a dedicated tape as well as mic preamp. You know, you get the character of each one of those. You have an on and off button here for that, and you can choose between the two that you want to go with. Very cool feature. Now, one very cool feature that's on the MKIII that is not on previous versions, and that is ultimately the ability to assign 2 independent plugins and control them independently of each other per section, per main section, I should say. So you can choose 2 different gates or different effects into there. You can choose 2 separate EQs. Maybe you want a surgical EQ. Maybe you want one for character and everything else like that. And then compressors, you can go between 2 different compressors. Let's say, for example, you wanted to go back between an LA2A style and then a CO1B, which is LA2-ish. And you can go back and forth and control those independently. You can also choose the order in which they're in there. Now, both plugins will remain active at the same time, but you can turn them on and off. So if you only want one EQ as an example, then you simply don't turn on the second option for the second EQ. Now, one of the things that I happen to like a lot, that to be honest with you, will be difficult to go over in this particular video, but a lot of the menus and the choices for loading channels and sends and things like that, they were on multi-use buttons where you kind of kept having to figure out, do I hold down my shift key to get to that, or can I just push the button or whatever? And they've kind of brought them out to be their own independent buttons. That is a huge, huge, huge deal for users. Do not underestimate the power of that, especially if these are things that you access on a regular basis. It's made it so much easier. You can look and see here by all the various push button controls that you have here. There are a lot more on the MKIII than there are the MKII. And that is a very desirable upgrade over previous versions of Console 1. Up to this point, all of the additional features they've added to the MKIII, I enjoy tremendously, and I think those alone are a great addition. There were some things that bothered me about working with the MKII that have all been solved on the MKIII. It's obvious to me they listened to their users and they implemented the particular desired features that everybody basically wants. So let's talk about the first one right out of the gate. With the MKII, what I found often is I would be controlling everything, but especially when I got to the EQ section, I needed to look up at the screen to be able to see what was going on. For me, you know, yes, they didn't have this available back in the day when everybody was working analog, but it's a feature that we have available today that I like a lot, and I want to see the EQ curve. One of the reasons that's really important to me, let's say, for example, if I'm trying to really establish instruments in the low frequency area, I need to be able to see where I'm cutting on the kick that may be an appropriate frequency to bring up on the bass so that I can hear those independently and they're not fighting with each other. The same thing would hold true for the various sections of an EQ as you go through it. So it's having that EQ curve there, which you can see right here on the unit, which simulates what's up there. And as if I go across and I choose different particular tracks on here, that's going to show me all the various EQ curves. And that I really, really, really like a lot. So having this visual representation right here is invaluable to me. Now I can truly work nonstop when I'm doing, look, the core of my mixing is done with EQ and compression. Those are the two plugins that I use practically on every channel, not compression on every channel, but certainly EQ on every channel. Thing that's so magical about this control surface is you develop muscle memory. You don't even have to think about where to go. The same thing is true of the MKII and the MKI. The ability to see a visual representation of what's going on for me is super, super important. And that one feature alone is extremely compelling to me to consider an upgrade. One of the other things that absolutely kind of drove me nuts, it was hard keeping track of where you were within channels of a mix. You would constantly having to be looking up and then looking back at the control surface to make sure that you're choosing the right number channel, because there was nothing on the MKII that would indicate the name of that channel. Well, as you can see here right now, that's been taken care of with the secondary display. So now I can keep looking down and I can scroll across through there until I find what it is that I have there, right? I get my bank up and I can continue to go across that. And as you can see, all of those are represented there. That feature, oh my gosh, I freaking love it. Because again, the thing that makes the Console 1 workflow so great is you don't need to look at the screen. You can just use your ears, which is the most important thing that you want to be able to do. And so that is important, all right? So those features are very, very, very welcome. Again, when I talked about before being able to choose between having two plugins per, having the ability to go back and forth between a core panner and the Weiss noise gate on there, that is magical for me. Now I can change on here also what I'm looking at. So I can see let's see here. What can I see? I can see my waveform. I can see my compressor, and these are independently chosen. I can go down through here and see what else. I can see my shape feature going on, which that ultimately is a gate. I can see an overall meter for gain reduction. I can see the input meter. And of course, I can see the frequency on the SSL. So ultimately, you just find the one that you want. And when you get to something, you can just change it to something else. Again, very valuable. I don't find that I change that as much as I do the other. I don't typically need a visual representation of my gate, so I tend to leave mine on the EQ setting. Now over here above the compressor section, as you see here, the ability to choose all the different components of it as well. So all of them are available on each one of these so that you can see what's going on. You also get a representation of your input and your output on the VU meters, which is also very, very, very handy in keeping proper gain staging. Now, I talked before about going between the various plugins. So on the EQ as an example, on EQ1, I've got the SSL 4000E. On EQ2, I've got the modern EQ. So now you can see whereas that's flat, here I can go through and change anything I want and ultimately do my high pass and low pass and, get in there. And anyway, you see where it's going with that. So that also is very great. So right now I've got the SSL going into that one. I can, of course, reverse that order if I choose. And now we're seeing a representation of that. You can see here where my EQ2 is turned off. Notice how I'm turning that on and off. You can do that on both of the units to particularly turn a plugin on or off. They just went about it somewhat differently on this layout. I love the fact that they've incorporated the sends and the separate sends here, so you can get up to 6 sends and control the sends on your control surface from these particular buttons here once you set that up. Now, keep in mind, the ability to pan, adjust a fader volume on your input within your digital audio workstation, as well as some other features that are out there, are not available in all DAW applications. In other words, if I choose a track on here and I'm going to snare 1 as an example, in Pro Tools, that is not choosing snare 1 in Pro Tools. However, if I'm in Nuendo or if I'm in Studio One or Logic, it does. All of these things control the fader, the send levels, as well as the panning left and right. So all of those controls can be controlled within the control surface itself, which is also very handy. You couldn't quite do that as well, I felt like, in the MKII because there were so many different buttons you had to push to get to that. So I prefer this workflow much better. Now let's talk about knobs. The knobs on this unit compared to previous versions are far superior. The potentiometers, they go to infinity. You can change it between stepped and infinity if you want to. These are all things you can do within the setting. They're also touch sensitive. So if I touch a particular fader, you notice I touch there, that's my low mid gain frequency. If I touch over here, that's my frequency for my high mid. Same thing over in my compressor, my release, my attack, my ratio, and my compressor. So they're touch sensitive. That is also quite handy when you're going back and forth between them. And especially when you're new at using and you're not quite sure, then ultimately that can help you figure out exactly where you're at. It's kind of written down there anyway, but it's a handy feature that you can kind of see where you're at with it. Another feature that's on the MKIII that's not on the MKII is you have features added to the MKIII where you can have much more flexible and much easier control on presets, whether that's channel strips or individual presets on each particular section where that's available. Having that is also very good. In addition to that, straight from the control surface, it has undo and redo buttons directly on the control surface, directly accessible. Another great feature. Also added to the control surface, you can have up to 4 independent different mix settings to go back and forth to be able to compare which one you like the best. As you choose between them, it'll go back and forth. Now in that, we'll also remember if you choose to change certain plugins and everything in there as well. It will retain all of that. Another valuable feature when you're trying to explore which one is best for that particular track. Now, as far as features, those really wrap up the ones that are mainly important to me, and I think probably most of you, especially if you're a Console 1 MK2 or MK1 user. That way you get a chance to fully understand what it is you're getting for spending that extra money. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the build quality of these units. The MKIII is built out of all aluminum, powder coated. It is solid as a rock. The weight of it is probably 2 to 3 times the MK2. So there's a lot more substantial, high quality components involved in this that have been on previous versions, which explains that, as well as adding LED monitors and some other features and buttons, are why this is more expensive than previous versions. Now, the MK1 and the MK2, although well built, don't get me wrong, well built, but nothing like the MKIII, are made out of mostly plastic housing. So ultimately, which one is going to last you longer, especially if you take it and go with it to other places? I would much rather have the MKIII than the MK2. I would feel much more comfortable about that type of movement and things like that. One other thing on there to note, the MK1 and the MK2 use the old school USB 1 type connector. You know, that one that's almost kind of square on the back that goes in, and then it has the traditional USB connector on the other side. This has 2 USB 3 ports, one on either side of it, depending on where you're connecting it up to. Now, one thing to note that I did find with the MK3 as well as the MK2, you really need to go directly to your computer with it if you can. If you're on a laptop like me, and I can't because I have limited ports, you should at least go into a powered dock. The differences between a dock and a hub will expand your connections, but it doesn't provide any additional power through the hub. And the more things you have plugged into it, the less it's going to work. And so when you get a powered hub, you know, a Thunderbolt hub as an example, or USB 3 hub, that's going to be able to give you solid power throughout each one of the connections and is as close to connecting directly to your computer as you're going to be able to get. So that concludes the overall overview of the differences between the MK3 and the MK2. I have not covered all of them, but I feel like I've covered the ones that are most important, especially the ones that will be most compelling to existing Console 1 users. You're probably asking the question, should I upgrade from the MK1 or MK2 to the MK3? Well, you can make that decision based upon what I've seen. Here's my opinion. I would be placing an order today for an MK3, and my MK2 would go on Reverb for sale or sell locally wherever you like to sell your music gear. I think the difference is quite compelling. Now, if you're in a situation to where you're not in the Console 1 ecosystem and you're on a limited budget, then the Console 1 MK2 will do a very, very, very good job for you. If you can swing the price difference between the MK2 and the MK3, I think you should probably save up and do it. I think you'll find that the features they've added are quite compelling and worth the cost difference. I would encourage you existing MK1 and MK2 users to check the sold listings on Reverb. Yes, if you don't know that, you can go into the categories and select only sold items so you can see what it's sold for. And there's typically a little graph that shows it over the last 18 months to 2 years where it's really, how much it's really sold used for. You can get an idea of what you can realistically expect to get for selling your previous version of the console. You can use that then to offset the cost of the MK3. At least that's what I would do. Lastly, there are additional plugins that you get along with the MK3 that you don't get with the MK2. Those are also some compelling add-ons as well. So for me, at the end of the day, working with the Console 1 workflow, I have found absolutely enjoyable. And there's no way in the world I would continue working without it unless somebody comes up with something different. But until that point, I'm sticking with the Console 1. I truly enjoy using it. It makes my mixing so much more efficient. I find that I don't get stuck into trying 50 different EQ plugins as an example. I think that's a common mistake a lot of people make. Now, I don't really make that anymore, but for those of you that do, this really puts you in a situation to where, as an example, you can put an API style console across your drums, an SSL across everything else. You can interchange whatever compressors or whatever gates or whatever other shape type plugins that you have out there. You can intermix those depending on the track you're using. And so you can find the ones that work best for you. But I have found having this controllability and really where everything is always mapped out to the right place makes it so much easier and so much more enjoyable. It reminds me, as an example, of working with the DigiDesign D command, of which I used for many, many years along with Pro Tools HDX. The layout is very similar to this and the workflow is identical. Identical as far as being able to get motorized skills. I have found that the D command, there's no better plugin control surface on the world that's ever been invented to date that is effective and easy to use as the D command. However, that's an old, out-of-date control surface. What Softube and Console 1 have done, and I'm not suggesting they copied directly from the D command, but certainly I have to imagine they were influenced on the power of that, having a dedicated section where everything is properly mapped out for your EQ as well as your compression. That alone is invaluable when you're mixing. So do I recommend the Console 1 workflow system? Abso-freaking-lutely. Yes, I do. Do I recommend the MK3? More than absolutely frequently. I think it is a fantastic control surface, one in which I think many of you will enjoy for many, many, many years to come. Well, do me a favor, leave some comments down below. Tell me what you think about this video. Let me know if there's some important aspects that I did not cover if you're an MK3 user who previously used a previous version of Console 1. If I left something out, let me know that, or better yet, let everyone else know that down in the comments. I would appreciate that.